There is something very attractive about revenge, especially when someone has been unfairly hurt, abused, or beaten. But then the victim rises up against their persecutor and delivers the ultimate blow that finally balances the scales of justice. Then there is a moment of satisfaction and relief, that glorious feeling of victory. Equilibrium has been restored. This is obviously not a new concept for mankind, and there are a million different stories of revenge throughout human history. Arguably, the greatest story ever told about revenge comes from a novel written by Alexandre Dumas. The book is called The Count of Monte Cristo and was later made into a movie. The story centers on Edmond Dantes, a young man with seemingly everything going for him. He has a beautiful fiancée named Mercedes, a promising career as a ship captain, and is well liked by everyone he meets. But his successes begin to breed contempt and envy amongst a few who would rather see him suffer than succeed. Edmond's best friend, Fernand Mondego, secretly lusts after his fiancée in fortune and life. Fernand begins to conspire against him with the city magistrate. The illiterate and naive Edmond is then tricked into delivering a letter from the captured Napoleon to a group of Bonapartist sympathizers and is then sentenced to life in prison at the infamous Château d'If, where the most dangerous political prisoners are kept and abused away from the watchful eyes of society. Edmond is put into solitary confinement, and the only human contact he has is once a year on his birthday, when the warden comes in to flog him. That is, until 6 years later, when he is startled in his cell by an eruption in the ground and the emergence of a fellow prisoner who is attempting to dig an escape tunnel. The prisoner is an Italian priest and intellectual who had been jailed for refusing to reveal the location of a hidden treasure to Napoleon. For 7 years, the priest educates Edmond in all facets of learning. In exchange, Edmond helps dig a new escape route, and the priest turns him into a well-educated and polished man. The priest also reveals to Edmond the location of the treasure that was kept hidden from Napoleon, and even gives him a map to find it should he ever escape. The priest dies before the completion of the tunnel, and Edmond escapes by crawling into the priest's body bag, which is then thrown into the sea. Upon his escape from prison, Edmond discovers his best friend Fernand was the one who betrayed him. Fernand married his fiancée Mercedes, and the two had a son only weeks after his imprisonment. As a result, a much older and literally unrecognizable Edmond then sets forth a plan for revenge. His plan involves taking on the name of the island where he found the hidden treasure, the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count quickly puts his money to use and begins to ingratiate himself to everyone in town. He is host to big, extravagant parties, uses his cultured intellect to entertain guests with wild stories, and even becomes close to Fernand and Mercedes after he sets up a fake rescue of their son, Albert. Slowly but surely, the Count ruins the lives of all those who had a hand in sending him to prison, and his desire for vengeance grows. It grows to the point where he becomes insatiable with rage and anger, until finally he reveals his true identity to Mercedes, who tells him that Albert is actually his son and that she only ran off with Fernand to hide his true parentage. After so much pain and hurt, Edmond finally relents and lets go of his hate. How much of human history has been dominated by revenge? Revenge that produces an endless cycle of violence, which we still see today. Muslim factionalism in the Middle East, anti-Christian violence in Africa, and the ever-increasing threat of terrorism. Nothing within fallen nature will ever break us free of these cycles. It is only the grace from without that can set us free from the never-ending cycle of revenge from within. In 1932, another Edmund had just contracted scarlet fever, and 4 days later, his young brother Carol received word of his death. 9 years later, Carol's father would die. This concluded the loss of his entire immediate family. The young, future John Paul cried out, "I'm all alone. At 20, I've already lost all the people I have loved." Carol would go on to live through the Nazi occupation of Poland and then the communist occupation of Poland. Then in 1981, he would nearly lose his life to a radical assassination attempt. The Pope had just finished his afternoon prayer and was making his way through St. Peter's Square in the Pope-mobile, kissing babies and blessing the 20,000 pilgrims who had gathered to see him, when suddenly, blasts from a 9mm semi-automatic pistol rang out. John Paul fell backward into the arms of his secretary. He had been hit by 3 separate bullets. His assailant, Mehmet Ali Atka, was a trained 23-year-old Turkish gunman who had escaped prison and sent a letter to a Turkish newspaper declaring he was going to kill the Pope just days before the shooting. The Pope was transferred into an ambulance that he had blessed himself that day. He also declared that a special blessing was to go upon whoever was the first person to ride in it. Little did he know it would be him, John Paul, who had lost every single person he loved by the time he was 20. Watched the Nazis, then the communists, abuse and kill his country and friends, was now hospital-bound and would never fully recover his strength. John Paul had risen to a place of high power and could easily crush his enemy and shame him. But he chose another way. After being sent home from the hospital, St. John Paul requested to meet with his shooter in prison. He wanted to forgive his assassin. Atka did not apologize, but instead wanted to know why the Pope was alive. He asked, "I know I was aiming right. I know that the bullet was a killer. So why aren't you dead?" The Pope replied, "One hand shot and another guided the bullet." The thing about revenge is that it is self-defeating. It harms not only the other, but it also kills the person seeking revenge. Because at the heart of our desire for revenge is a desire for justice. And only an openness to the transcendent, merciful God will free us from the injustices of our fallen world. Jesus alone can satiate our thirst for justice. After he was abandoned and brutally murdered, the first words Jesus spoke to his apostles were, "Peace be with you." John Paul knew this love, and Edmund was transformed by it. Experiencing this liberating and merciful truth is the rebirth undergone by Edmond Dantes, and it epitomizes the person of Pope St. John Paul II.